So, welcome everybody on this day 9 of this book, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. So, chapter 6, Switching Questions. As I stepped off the elevator at the Pearl building, I found Joseph watering his ficus trees with a large red watering can. It surprised me to see him doing something I would have handed off to my staff. He turned to me with a friendly smile. I love having plants around. It's a daily reminder that all living things require our attention, he said. No office should be without at least a plant or two. My wife, Sarah, is the gardener in our family. She says plants force us to ask questions. Are they getting enough water, enough sun? Do they need a little pruning? Do they need special nutrients? They thrive on questions just like humans do. He quickly finished his gardening chores and we went inside. When we finished our last meeting, we were talking about the choice map and what it tells us about learner and judger mindsets. Joseph began. Have you had any further thoughts about any of this? I guardedly told him about Grace, our talk in the kitchen, and how she'd taken the choice map from the refrigerator to work with her. It's clear that we get different results depending on which of the two paths we take, learner or judger. I told Joseph hesitantly, maybe I get stuck in judger more than I'd like to admit. Fortunately, there is a fast track out of judger. Look at this lane in the middle. Joseph pointing to the little road joining the judger and learner paths. A sign labeled it the switching lane. That lane is the key to change. You get to learn by asking switching questions. Let's look at how that works. When you are standing in judger, Joseph continued, the whole world can look pretty bleak. Even though the world is filled with infinite possibilities, we have only limited access to noticing them when seeing with judger eyes or hearing with judger ears. Let me show you how to change your viewpoint, how to literally see and hear differently, sometimes almost immediately. For a moment, locate yourself on the judger path, right where the switching lane begins. Now, I would request everybody, जिन के questions हैं regarding how to switch, or you continuously find yourself in that judger's path, work along with what we are reading right now. So imagine whatever is it that you're going through, think of all the questions and accordingly work with the flow of what is happening right now in the book, because it's very important, number one, to catch yourself that you are in the judger mode, but more important is to actually switch from the judger to learner, because catching is the most important. That's the first step. But what do? We've caught ourselves that we are in the judger mode. We are in that mindset where we are judging, criticizing, or whatever is that is happening, whatever questions that are coming. The key to catching yourself in the judger does not lie in staying in the judger. The key to catching yourself in the judger mindset is to snap out of that judger lane to get to the learner's mindset lane. So whatever issue you're having, I would suggest work with it along with what we are reading today. I turned my attention to the map and found the switching lane. Anytime you step onto this path, he continued, pointing to the switching lane, you automatically step into choice. You wake up, you unveil a whole new view of the world. You literally switch how you're thinking about what's possible when you observe your own thoughts, and especially the judger ones. You gain the ability to choose freely what to think and do next. You are talking about choice like it's something we possess, a capacity. Absolutely. We are all born with that capacity, Joseph exclaimed. That's what makes us human. Choice is always ours, although it takes practice and sometimes courage to make the best use of it. The author, Viktor Frankl, spoke of the last of human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given circumstances, to choose one's own way. And making this practical is what it's all about. That's where the rubber hits the road. Whenever you sense you might be in judger, pause, take a deep breath, get curious, and ask yourself, am I in judger? And if the answer is yes, you can step onto switching lane by simply asking simple questions like, do I want to be in the judger? And where would I like to be? Joseph laughed. It is easy. Not always, but it is simple. The switching lane takes you quickly to the learner path. You'll find a list of switching questions in your workbook. That list is another of the tools in the QT systems. Sometimes something was nagging at the back of my mind, but I couldn't get hold of it. Then it dawned on me. I remembered asking Grace how she shifted her mood so quickly. I realized she used switching questions, whether she was aware of it or not. At the end of the day, what matters is when you catch yourself that you are in the judge's mindset or you're in the judge's lane. That is where you have an option now, because you, with that simple question, when you catch yourself in the judger, you come to that intersection of that switching lane. And the first question, do you want to be in the judger lane? If yes, then continue. If no, then what is the choice that you are making now, and how we can use these empowering questions, which will be covered again in the subsequent part of this chapter. But always remember, अगर आपने अपने आप को realize, consciously aware, okay, realize कर लिया है that you are in the judger mode or you are in that judger's mindset, from there on it is a choice, and whatever choice you take, the choice you take to be in that judger's mode is your choice. The choice to use switching questions and shift to the learner's mode, again your choice. The choice to just stay there in that judger's bit, again your choice. Do not get why you are making that choice, but realize you are making that choice and you are going ahead with that option and you are aware about it. क्यों हो रहा है, बार बार मैं ऐसे हो रहा हूं, ये हो रहा हूं, these are nothing but tricks of the mind. But what is factual is that you are making that choice, either to stay in that judge's pit or to stay on that intersection of that switching lane, or to make that choice to shift from the judges to the learner's mindset. At the end of the day, that choice is always with you, and it will be. Nobody can take it away from you. Nobody can, make sure that you cannot have that choice. That choice is always there with you, and you exercise that choice every single time when you are in that mode where you catch yourself that, yes, I am in the judge's lane. And when you continue to make a choice to be in the judge's lane, in spite of asking the question that I do not want to be in the judge's lane, you still exercise your choice to stay there. That's a choice you have exercised. And you only have that option to exercise another choice at that point of time to switch from this judge's mindset to the learner's mindset. And the key to make that switch, to make that change, to make that change in that choice is to let go of your ego at that time. Because your ego will continue to get your attention towards being a judger. It will continue to, make sure, it'll continue to make sure that you are passing judgments and you stay in that judge's muddy pit. It's only when you transcend that ego part of you, or you transcend that egoic part of your mind, that is when you make that choice of switching from a judger to a learner. और अगर आप वो choice exercise नहीं कर रहे हो, that does not mean you don't have a choice. If you are not exercising that choice to switch, again, that is your choice. And always remember, all we have is choices with us. And each choice will always have a particular consequence. And till the time we do not change that choice, the consequences will not change. So if you are continuing to make that choice to be on that judge's mindset, to be in that judge's pit, the consequences are you will always be caught up in that rut on that judge's mindset, on that judge's path. In order to change your circumstance, in order to change, get out of that judge's path, judge's mindset, or that judge's pit, you have to make that change of choice. Because जब तक आप वो choice नहीं बदलोगे, the consequences will not change. Till the time you do not make that change in your choice, you will not be able to switch from the judge's path to the learner's path. And that is a fact. Joseph was gazing thoughtfully out the window. Let me tell you a story that illustrates how switching questions can make a huge difference in performance and results. It's a true story about my daughter Kelly, who's an avid gymnast. In college, she was even training for a national championship competition. Here's what happened. During training, Kelly would perform quite well most of the time, but only most of the time. Sarah and I knew she'd never make the team that way. Her performance was too erratic. So upon her request, we worked with Kelly so she could make the improvement she needed to make the team. First, we asked her what she thought about just before a performance. She discovered that in those crucial moments, she always asked just one basic question: will I fail this time? Which is a judge's question, I observed. Right, Joseph said. and asking it led to what my daughters called judger trouble. That question really interfered with her performance. So the three of us worked on finding a switching question she could ask herself instead to propel her quickly into learner. The new question was Kelly's own idea. How can I do a great job? So from will I fail this time, attracting that failure, switching it with how can I do a great job, being empowered and taking responsibility with that change in the question and with that change of the mindset. That did the trick. Using that new question, she reprogrammed herself by directing her attention in a positive direction. Her performance improved exponentially and also became highly predictable. Kelly says that new question helps her stay in the zone. Did she make the team? She sure did, Joseph said. And by the way, she came home with a trophy. It wasn't first place, but I was really proud. I have to confess that 20 years ago, I would have probably chastised her for not taking first place. Why, I tell you, having children teaches us to ask a whole set of questions. By the way, you'll find Kelly's story in my Question Thinking Hall of Fame. This all sounds like a bit of magic to me, I equipped, or a miracle. It's neither magic nor a miracle. Joseph replied smilingly, it's a method. With questions, we can even change ourselves physiologically. For example, the question, what if I get fired, can set off a whole chain of biochemical stress reactions in your body. Kelly's question, will I fall this time, made her anxious, which interfered with her performance and reinforced any old programming for failure. Consciously, of course, she didn't want to fail, but it's exactly what happened, anyways, with that old question. Thoughts set intention. Learner questions program us with a positive intention. In Kelly's case, for the right attitude and moves for an outstanding performance. By implication, you are suggesting that judges can't be top performers? I reflected. I can't agree with you there. I've known judge types who produced quite a lot. Be careful about using labels like judge types. There isn't anybody who's a judger person or a learner person. These term refers only to mindsets. And as you know by now, every one of us has both mindsets and always will. That's the conundrum of being human. The problem with labels is that they can become permanent, and that makes changing seem impossible. On the other hand, our mindsets are dynamic. They can change from minute to minute. The point is that question thinking puts us more in charge of making the changes we want. But you are absolutely right that many people spend more time in judger than learner, Joseph said. And they may be quite driven and productive. However, their success often comes with very high costs. People with an overactive judger can drive themselves and everyone around them nuts. And that lowers productivity, cooperation, and creativity. It's hard to feel loyal to or trust someone who has a high judger quotient. operating from judger can build a resentment and conflict, whether with your family or your coworkers. If you want people to be really engaged and involved, learner is the path to take. An organization led by people in high judger tends to have greater levels of stress, conflict, and people problems. These kind of leaders are not well equipped to be flexible and adaptable or successful in meeting challenges. And just imagine the havoc that judger plays when you take that mindset home with you at night. So it's very important at that juncture of making that choice to switch from a learner's mindset to from a judge's mindset to a learner's mindset is what is that empowering question which will motivate you, which will create a positive influence on you, and would help you make that journey of switching from that judge's mindset to a learner's mindset. So उस टाइम पे क्वेश्चन कौन सा पूछना है? Because if you take the example of Kelly, if you're going for a performance, will I fail this time? Quite a strong chances you will. But how can I make it right? How can I perform greatly? What do I have to do in order to give my best? See, at the end of the day, wherever your attention and energy goes, everything follows that. Where your attention goes, the energy will flow there. So if you're asking an disempowering question, the energy is going to flow to disempower you. But if you're asking an empowering question, the energy will flow towards empowering you. So क्या question हम पूछ रहे हैं, that is going to actually decide what is going to happen. Because that question sets in that intent for what is now going to follow. And the energy is actually going to be following that intent that you create with that question. So one of the most empowering questions, what is it that I can do right now to empower myself? If that means take a deep breath, go for it. If that means you need to think, you need to have something, eat something, drink something, whatever it takes, do it. Because you have asked this question, that what is it that I can do right now to empower myself, whatever answer that comes to you, when you do that, it is a chemical reaction that happens in the brain, which will now start empowering. That's the power of thought. That's the power of intention that comes with that thought. And that's the power of asking that empowering question, because then when you're focusing on that, the energy is actually going to follow that. My wife Sarah once wrote an article exploring the difference between judger marriages and learner marriages. Her premise was that our experience of intimate relationships will be very different depending on whether we look on our partner with learner eyes, judger eyes. Sarah points out that with learner eyes, we are able to focus on what we appreciate about the other person and what's working in our relationship. At least most of the time, we build from strengths rather than dwelling on flaws, our own or our partner's. I nodded, thinking that this made sense. When we are in Judger, whether at home or work, everything can seem like a roadblock. When that happens, we need to go back to the basic switching questions like, am I in Judger? Will it get me what I really want? Where would I rather be? Pause, take a deep breath, put yourself on the switching lane, and you can step right onto the learner's path. If what you say is true, I could just stay in learner by always keeping those questions in mind. Theoretically, yes, but life isn't really that simple, and not one of us is a saint. We are all going to fall into the judger from time to time. That's the point I'm emphasizing when I say we are all recovering judges. Joseph continued. But I promise you this, the more you take care to heart the choice map and switching questions, the faster you will be able to step into learner, the easier it will be, and the longer you will be able to stay there. You will also spend less time in judger, and the experience itself is usually less intense. So the consequences of being there will be minimized. And remember, Joseph continued, judger has two faces. One being judgmental toward ourselves, and the other being judgmental towards others. The results can look quite different, but they come from that same judgmental place. If we focus our judger mindset on ourselves, for example, with questions such as, why am I such a failure? We hurt our self-confidence and may even feel depressed. On the other hand, if we focus our judger mindset on others with questions such as, why is everyone around me so stupid and frustrating? We tend to get angry, resentful, and hostile. Either way, with judger, we end up in some kind of conflict, either with ourselves or with others. When judger takes control, it's impossible to find genuine resolution or any sense of peace. That's why lots of mediators also use the learner judger material, especially the choice map. Let me give you an example of judger when we aim it at ourselves. Years ago, Sarah was talking with Ruth, her editor, at one of the magazines she writes for. They were sharing how they had both had issues with their weight. Sarah told Ruth how she used the choice map to help her make better choices about eating. Ruth got so excited, she asked Sarah to write an article about her experience. In the article, Sarah described how the questions people typically ask themselves about eating either get them in trouble with their weight or help them be successful and content about it. The troublemaker questions she listed included, what's wrong with me? Why am I out of control again? Why am I such a bad person? These are all judgmental questions, I interjected. Right? And whenever Sarah started down the judge's path with questions like those, she really beat herself up, which of course sent her spiraling right down to the judge's pit. Unfortunately, those judger meltdowns usually caused her to feel out of control and eat even more. Sometimes that led to real binging. Once Sarah recognized the impact those troublemaker judger questions had on her, she decided to look for switching questions to rescue herself. She said, that switching questions are the best thing she's ever found for getting back in control. Her new questions included, am I willing to forgive myself? How do I want to feel? Which got her onto the switching lane, a shortcut back to learner. Right again. Once she switched into learner, she figured out some questions to help her stay there. What will serve me best right now? Am I being honest with myself? What can I do to feel better that doesn't involve eating? Whatever she asked herself, one of these questions, she felt empowered rather than out of control. Not only that, she's gotten herself in great shape. She tells me it's pretty easy to maintain now. Judging by the photos of Sarah on Joseph's desk, she certainly didn't look like a woman with weight issues. All this talk was making me even more uncomfortably aware of how often the questions I asked myself were straight out of a judge's mindset. From what I've seen so far, Joseph said, in a surprising, accepting tone of voice, while you obviously don't have trouble with your weight, you still have a lot of self-judger going on. I can't disagree, I hedged, but what's your basis for saying that? That's easy, Joseph said. Do you remember the time when you were so sure I saw you as a judger and a loser? Yes, I said hesitantly, sensing I was stepping into something I would regret. That's the perspective that keeps you bogged down and resigned about being able to change. But while you aim judgmental questions at yourself, Joseph said, looking straight at me, you are also pretty good at targeting other people. I agree, I can be pretty hard on myself and on other people. I began to swarm. But sometimes people really are jerks and idiots. I know I'm right about that. You've got to accept this as a fact of life and exercise good common sense or good judgment, as you already said. Without comment, Joseph directed my attention back to the choice map. As I held it in my hand, he leaned forward and pointed at the figure that was starting down the judge's path. Then he pointed to the thought bubble over his head. It contained just one question, which I read out loud. Whose fault it is? What jumped into my mind were all the troubles I've been having at work. I focused on the stark moment of truth when I concluded I was a failure and would have to resign. The shame I felt was just awful. Did Judger have a hand in shame too? I was certainly in my judger head at that moment, having judged myself as a loser, but wasn't I justified? I couldn't deny its truth. What's going through your mind right now? I replied with discomfort. The more we talk, the more I see I've got to accept the blame for a lot of what's happened. Blame? Joseph said. Tell me exactly what the word means to you. The bottom line, it means I should step down. I am the incompetent one here, period, end of conversation. Back up for the moment. Change your question from who's to blame to what am I responsible for? I thought about this for a moment. Blame, responsibility. Aren't they the same thing? Not at all, Joseph said. Blame is judger, responsibility is learner. There is a world of difference between them. Focusing on blame binds us from seeing other alternatives and solutions. It's almost impossible to fix a problem when operating from blame. Blame can be paralyzing. Blame keeps us stuck in the past Responsibility, on the other hand, paves the path for a better future. If you focus your questions on what you might be responsible for, you also open your mind to new possibilities. You're free to create alternatives that lead to positive change. Blame keeps us stuck in the past. Responsibility paves the way, paves the path for a better future. So it's very important to be responsible and ask that empowering question: what can I do right now in order to empower myself? And rather than looking who's to blame or rather than self condemning yourself, ask yourself, what am I responsible for right now? What can I do? What am I responsible for? And then work accordingly. So, tool number 3, put the power of questions to work. It basically is from chapter 2, but somehow chapter 6 and 5 was important for us. This tool has 2 parts. The first A has to do with becoming more prolific and effective at asking internal questions, the ones which we ask ourselves. The second has to do with becoming more prolific and effective at asking interpersonal questions, those we ask each other. So, part A, internal questions. Purpose: to become more aware of your self questions and to increase the quantity and quality of your internal questions. Discussion: Ben starts to change once he realizes that the question he asks himself, both learner and judger, have a huge impact on the results he is able to achieve. He then begins refining his questions by applying the tools in the question thinking system. All our actions are driven by internal questions, which we may or may not be aware of asking ourselves. Even an ordinary activity, such as getting ready to go on a family vacation, is driven by question. For example, think of a time when you were packing for a trip. You went to your closet, your bureau, and your medicine cabinet and asked yourself such questions: what climate will we be in? Do I need evening as well as casual clothes? What packs well and doesn't wrinkle? And how long will we be gone? You answered your questions first in your mind, and then by doing something, you selected some items and put them in your suitcase. As you think about packing for travel, notice that you would ask yourself very different questions depending on whether you were going, say, on an African safari or a lovely week in Paris. And what if you arrived at your destination and discovered that you've forgotten something? That just means you forgot to ask yourself about that item either when you were planning or packing for your trip. These 2 practices for increasing your awareness of self questions are very simple. The first turns your attention to how prevalent questions are in your life. And the second focuses on the questions and statements in our thinking and the kind of results they produce. So, part A, practice 1. When you get up tomorrow morning, do a little question research. Notice what questions you are asking yourself as you get dressed. Then, from time to time, throughout the day, ask yourselves what questions might be driving your behavior in the situations, both in terms of your own actions and your interaction with others. It may take some patient observing to recognize those behavior generating questions, but stay with it until you are able to see the influential role that self questions play in your life. Practice 2 of part A. As a second piece of question research, notice your responses to the situations that come up through the day. Is your first thought a statement, an answer, or is it a question? If your first thought is a statement, experiment with changing it into a question. Notice how shifting from a statement to a question changes your moods, actions, or interactions. Notice any correlations between your statements or questions and the kinds of results they produce. Part B, interpersonal questions. The purpose is to become aware of the questions you ask other people, including the impact of your questions on them, and to increase the quantity and quality of your interpersonal questions. Discussion. Through Ben's story, Joseph helps him to understand the importance of asking questions. Questions is to gather information, create understanding and learning, build, improve, and sustain relationships, clarify and confirm listening, stimulate creativity and innovation, create collaboration, set goals and create action plans, explore, discover, and create new possibilities. Practice 1 of part B. Approximately what is the ratio of questions you ask versus statements you make? Your ask oblique tell ratio. Do your communication with others involve more questions and fewer statements or answers? In at least one conversation today, practice asking many questions. Practice number 2 for part B. Recall a time when a particular question made a positive difference in your personal and professional life. What was the question? What was the result? And what was it about the question that made such a difference?